This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is Vanessa Marshall, Harrison Dula from Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
Joining us today for a cup of coffee to talk about the 8th episode in Season 1 of Andor. The episode is called Narkina 5. Our two guests, one returning guest and one brand new guest I am really excited about. First, we'll bring in our returning guest from the Colby Cast, Colby Mead. Colby, welcome back to Coffee with Kenobi.
I'm back, and it is a pleasure to be here. I can't wait to talk about this show again. It's just so different. I just can't wait. Thank you for having me back.
Of course, yeah. You've been on now talking about Andor twice, and I don't think Tom's been on yet to talk about Andor. So you're the new Tom Gross, I guess.
Don't put that on me. I can't live up to those expectations.
I don't know if you'll be able to laugh like Tom, but we're more than willing and excited to have you on the show. But that is not our only co-host for today's show. I also have, she is someone that you may have heard on other podcasts, as the Rebel Base Card podcast, or on the Colby Cast as well. She is from, her website / blog is The Long Take. You may know her as Qui-Gon Jen. Her friends know her, however, as Jen, and I think I have your pronunciation correct of your last name, Sopchockchai.
Oh, very good. That was your first try, and you got it.
Excellent. Good. Well, Jen, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm a huge fan of obviously this podcast and the Colby Cast. It's really been such a dream to go from listener to these podcasts to guest. Somewhat surreal. But I have our mutual friend and past guest on the show, Greg Cass, Ion Cannon, to thank. And Rebel Base Card podcast. That was the first podcast I was on. So it's been so great getting such a warm welcome from the Star Wars podcasting community.
Oh, well, it's awesome. It's awesome to have you. I'm a big fan of Greg, and it's been great to hear you chatting. So it's great to share the microphone with you. Let's talk about, wow, this episode. I mean, again, we say this every single week about Andor. They spare no emotional expense to throw such massive power our way. What I like to do is I like to give a letter grade, and I like to give overall thoughts, but I also want you to pick one word. If you had to describe the episode in one word, what would that word be? And then you can follow up that word with the letter grade and your explanation, overall thoughts on the show. Jen, I'm going to have you kick us off.
Sure. So, in my life as a teacher, actually, I'm not able to give A pluses. So it's very nice for me to be able to give an A plus to this episode. Mm-hmm. Andor, more so than any other Star Wars series, has been so consistently excellent. Like, I don't think I would go below an A for any of the episodes we've gotten so far. But this one really stands out because it was maybe the most terrifying for me. And so the word I would use to describe it is dystopian. It's just like, I think more, it really, the whole show has been very, very gritty and very dark and very, unafraid to show us what oppression and tyranny look like in a way that we haven't seen before. But I feel like this episode in particular really scared me in a way that other ones hadn't before.
Yeah. Yes. Colby, what about you?
Every time I've taken pages and pages and pages of notes on this show, because as you guys said, we talk about it on the Colby Cast too. And every single page starts off with the same word, and it's tense. It's just tense. This is a tense show. It's tense. And this episode was as tense as any of the other ones. I gave it an A because, frankly, like Jen, like you just said, I don't think any episode I've given less than an A. There is no less than an A, just with the production quality, the performances, the writing, all of that just automatically just lifts it to an A. So that content is what bumps it up for me. This episode didn't have, the punch that maybe in episode 3 or episode 6 with all the spectacle and action. But in other, it had it in other places that it counted too. So definitely an A for me. And again, this show just is not good for my blood pressure.
Well, it's amazing you even have blood pressure after watching this episode. I mean, honestly, to me, this is an absolute A+. The one word I would use to describe it is bleak. It's bleak.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the power of this episode is that Star Wars, we have been told, is built on hope. This episode is the antithesis of hope. There is no hope for anyone in this cavalcade of characters that we get to be exposed to. The small segments of hope kind of come early on from the ISB and maybe a possible new ISB recruit. I'm sure we'll get to that as we talk about this. But the depths of loneliness, of misery, of depression, of anxiety, of fear, I mean, it can almost choke you emotionally. And it is so well done. It just continues to be a master class. It's operatic in a very unique way. And I've been saying that this whole series feels like a Tolstoy novel to me. And I feel like it almost gets into Charles Dickens here with the oppression and the squalor and the lack of a reason to be optimistic about anything. I mean, when your sole sense of joy is maybe this food you're drinking out of a tube might have a little bit of flavor, that's pretty frightening. Plus, I have a thing with feet. I think they're gross. So, I'm sure we will get to that. Yeah.
Don't watch House of the Dragon.
I won't.
I was going to say the same thing. There actually was on Twitter today, I think it was the Ringerverse that posted, they had a great joke where they showed a close-up of Cassian's feet right after they all take their shoes off on the transporter over, and they said, "For free?"
Oh, jeez. All right. Let's talk about Cassian. I feel like one of the big challenges for me about the episode is that I took 5 pages of notes. Like I took 2.5 hours to watch this episode because I kept pausing it and writing stuff down and pausing it and writing stuff down. And then I left my notepad at school. So I don't have it, but I have, hopefully it registered, and everything I've been preaching to my students for years and years is going to resonate with me. So we'll see how it goes. But right off the bat, Cassian, when we see him, at the end of the last episode, the announcement, we had this time jump. It must not have been that long because we do know it's been a month since things have happened with Cyril. But he's on a new planet and he's been arrested. And as he's told us several times, I'm a tourist. In other words, I have nothing to do with the current crisis in the galaxy because I've chosen to take a vacation from life. I've chosen to live with this strange woman who we don't know who it is. I'm just going to go around and do my thing, ignore my family, ignore everything else. I've got my money. I have nothing I stand for. If you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. And he falls for it. He gets arrested by the Empire. He tells him his name is Keith Girgo, and he gets shipped to a place called Narkina 5 right off the bat. We joked about the whole feet thing, but the dehumanization starts right off the bat. Everybody has to kick off their shoes. There are various degrees of wealth invested in the shoes, I think it's fair to say. And then when it clicks and all their handcuffs fly to like their armrests on the chairs and they're afraid. I always say, like, whenever we fly, whenever there's turbulence or something, I always say to my family, look, whenever there's something happens, just look at the flight attendants. If they're not nervous, then you shouldn't be either because they do this for a living. They do it all the time. When Cassian, who has seen hell, he's lived through hell, when he looks scared, then as an audience, we'd know this is serious. Like this is beyond what even Cassian Andor himself is used to. A shocking start that very much sets the tone for the bleakness of this episode.
For sure. And he keeps that look on his face, that just pure terror and shock for pretty much the whole episode. And I think for me, my expectations going in, I really thought we were going to get a little bit more of a time jump between episodes where he'd already have been in prison. And I think, and that someone he'd be already trying to figure out how to get out, or someone's going to come and break him out. That was sort of my expectation going in. And so I was like, oh, wow, they're really just continuing where we left off from last episode. And I think it was such a powerful choice because we get to see him normalize this horrible horrible system that he's now become a part of, right? So he goes from being shell-shocked and just kind of like staring and being like, where am I and what is going on? And then when it says, so many months or late, it says whatever increment of time, I can't remember now. We cut forward to he's been there for a while, and then you see him just slurping down the tube. He's walking around like nothing's wrong, like it's just life is business as usual. And that to me was the most terrifying thing, that he so quickly became indoctrinated and conditioned to the prison system.
I immediately just want him out of this place as fast as possible. That's how scary it is, right? When you can't trust. And actually, I just thought of the quote that Nemec gave him in Aldani, where he said, "A surprise from below is always, more shocking than a surprise from above." They're literally walking on something that can kill them. And that is so jarring and so scary. I felt like I was watching an episode of The Galaxy's Toughest Prisons, right? Because they literally take you through the whole process. Shoes are gone. He's being taken to this place. They give him a taste of what could happen through that floor. Then they walk him through the room where the guards are, and they have weapons. And it's all just so jarring. And the design of this prison with the stark white walls and those stark white uniforms are all it's just so jarring, and it keeps us so off kilter, and we don't know what's happening. Then they take him into this room and they explain to him how this place works, and it's literally designed to, almost like Mon Mothma, she shows you the stone in her hand and you don't see the knife at your throat. And it's a rewards and punishment based kind of thing. And the reward is that you might get some good stuff, but the punishment is that you're going to suffer tremendous pain. So, for Cassian, just for me, looking at Cassian, I just want him out of this place as fast as possible. And it just goes to show you again with this show, they don't mind slowing down and getting a hyper zoom on people, on characters and places. They're not in a rush, and we're just hanging out here, and I can't wait for him to get out. I don't know how it's going to happen, but I fear for him.
Well, I think, is it 5 months? Is that the time jump?
I don't know.
I feel like that it's either 3 or 5 months. I can't quite remember.
I know either way they talk about he was there for 30 shifts, but that was after he had already worked that first shift. So
that's true.
Yeah, maybe it's because the text might say shifts and not time that we're having a hard time remembering.
Yeah,
it's hard to convert it.
Yeah, because Cyril does look at those reports and say it's been a month.
Yep.
But then we get the time jump of how long he's been there. I think that one of the more telling things about this is when Cassian first gets there and he looks out the window and it's not after it's after he's been there for a while. He looks out the window and he sees the other, rows in long assembly tubes of people also going to their quarters. And you can't help but get vibes of Attack of the Clones, right? And see all of the clones being moved through without individuality, without personality, without purpose other than whatever the people creating them want them to do. And it's this whole thing, like some of the challenges here is that, one, what are they building? No one knows. No one appears to explain to them. It doesn't even seem to be important that they explain. All that matters is that they are productive, that they do what they are told, and they are set up as a competition against one another. And the rewards are basically, hey, we're not going to torture you. You're not going to wish you were dead. That's slavery. That is 100% slavery. It's indentured servitude, and it's horrific and disgusting. And I think nothing sort of punctuates it more than when Cassian again is in that sequence, and the man in front of him is like miming the actions of what he's been doing for God knows how long he's been doing these things. And Cassian again sees the fruit of his labors, not only how what he is doing is affecting people, but how he doesn't seem to have any chance. If he stood up for what he believed in earlier for a bigger purpose than money, then maybe he wouldn't be in this situation. It's really hard to say. I don't know that he's that forward thinking about it at this particular time in his life. All I know is that it just seems so unforgiving. It's frightening. By the way, Andy Serkis, that was a nice surprise. Seeing him as, again, if I had my notes, I wrote down his name. I don't have those in front of me. But
Kino?
he's
I want to say it's
what is it?
Kino
Loy.
I want to say Roy.
That's right. That's
Loy,
right.
okay.
That is right. I remember writing that. Thank you for that. So he is obviously very intense too, but I get the sense that he just is intense because he wants to get out. And, he says he's got 200 some days on his sentence left, while other people remind us that it actually doesn't matter. They let you out when they want to let you out. He's so good at his job, they're probably not going to do that. But he basically breaks down the rules of how this thing works. I know, of course, the main thing is the shoes and the feet. And right away when the Imperials walk in with their boots that they just got from the Imperial version of Payless, then you know right away, okay, this is going to be really, really important. But in all honesty, like why feet? Like there's something symbolic about this. There's more to it than just, rubberized soles or whatever is going on prevents you from being tortured. But why do we think feet is the way that they chose to do this? What's symbolic about it?
Forgive me, but I actually just thought of Die Hard. And one of the, I don't know if you guys consider that to be a Christmas movie. I don't even know.
It's not.
I don't even know what that discussion is about. So I'm just going to go by that. But one of the most uncomfortable things about that movie is that he's running around for 3/4 of it without shoes, and it makes you vulnerable. Every step he takes. I mean, have you ever you've stepped on something sharp, and we all have in our life, right?
Legos,
the enemy, the bane of a barefoot's existence. But it makes you vulnerable. You can't just do what you need to do. You're not protected. Your soul literally is bared, right? In the sole of your foot. You see what I did there?
Good.
So that is just immediately gets you off kilter, and the danger is palpable.
I like that. If only we had a professor here who could take this and run with it. Oh, look. Hey, Jen.
I mean, okay, I guess this is where I talk about Foucault. So to me, I don't know if this really counts as symbolism, but to me, it was more about, we're not going to use brute force on you, but we're going to have this system set up where like it kind of regulates itself. So it really reminded me of, let me start with, there's a quote that the guard, a statement the guard makes when they first arrive. And he says, now, those who have been incarcerated before will be surprised by the calm sanitary conditions and our minimally invasive enforcement techniques. Right. And so to me, that set the tone for like, this is not going to be prisons like we've seen before. And so to me, it really reminded everything else we learned from that point forward reminded me of, there's a French philosopher named Foucault who wrote a whole thing. It's called Discipline and Punish. And he focuses on prisons and specifically the technique from the 19th century called the panopticon, where prisoners can't see the guards, but the guards can constantly be surveying the prisoners. And so it's this idea of like, it's this institution, self-regulating institution that's set up where it's kind of self-policing, right? So a guard never has to attack or hit or physically discipline or punish an inmate, right? It regulates itself. So the idea that the floor manager, Kino, he's one of them, and yet he's the one keeping all of them in line, is really, it's really twisted, but it's how these systems sort of like self-police, right? And so it's like, and same thing with, the cells don't have walls on them. They don't have bars, but because they don't have shoes, they've been deprived of this very basic thing that they're used to on their feet, that has made them vulnerable. So now wherever they go, they're kind of they are sort of forced to follow the system that's been set up. So there's nothing like it seems almost like there's nothing keeping them there. And yet the consequence is like almost worse, by, when you get zapped. So that I don't know if that actually helps at all. But to
I
me,
think
it was like, I
helps a
was like, I think Tony Gilroy must have read Foucault and probably more recently and more thoroughly than I have. But, yeah.
I think that was amazing. I love that. And I have not read that either, but I think that's really interesting. I mean, to me, the whole feet thing is like, you know, everybody's still going to dress the same. You know, here's your little cell. It's the architecture, by the way, is so great. It just reminds me that the big room where they work reminds me of the giant lobby in the Galactic Star Cruiser, although that one's a lot more welcoming and friendly, and you can wear shoes. In fact, I encourage you to do so, by the way, because this is a public place. But the idea that it's sanitary and non-invasive, but they do close-ups of the feet, and it's pretty clear to me, and I'm not trying to be funny, like nobody got a pedicure when they did this show. Like it's just really raw. The one thing everybody has in common, most people have in common, at least on this show, is that they all have feet, right? Different levels of skill, of fighting, of prowess, of experience in war. But the one commonality you have, when you strip that away, then they're exposed. Ostensibly, you have your dignity because you're clothed, but you really don't because you're just out there bare and exposed. And, feet, you can be the toughest martial artist in the world or a Jedi Knight, but your feet are still going to be vulnerable. They're still going to be sensitive. So there's that exposure to the elements to your peers. Let's not... they make a big deal every time they are building something that they say clear, and no one takes a shortcut there. They all hold their hands up in the air to stay far away. That stuff falls on your feet, you're done. You're done. They're getting a replacement for you, and you're probably going to be executed. So it just shows, interestingly, how much they have you. And it's no wonder that it's so hopeless. It's so powerful, and just... I think the thing that shocks me is we've got like elements of what's that film that Dustin Hoffman was in where he was a prisoner on an island? Jen, I know you're big into the Oscars. I know it was. I am too, by the way. We'll talk about that another time. But it's not Serpico. I know that's a cop movie. But what is it? They remade it recently too. I think it has maybe Paul Newman in it as well. I'm gonna have to look it up. But it reminded me of that flair. It also kind of had the feel of a concentration camp, didn't it, to a degree?
I got to say that everything about this prison is just rooted in cruelty, right? Because it's not only your motivation is not only fear of, number one, death, fear of pain, but they give you this false idea of reward, which you guys have talked about. Jen, you brought up the fact that there's no bars on the cells. And the one thing that was super creepy to me is when Andy Serkis's character asked Andor, do you walk in your sleep, or do you sleepwalk? It's that's absolutely terrifying, because if you do, there's nothing to stop you, right? So the whole thing is designed. The whole thing is designed for you to feel somewhat at ease in a sense, but just on the other side of that ease is literal death, right? And then you're working, you're doing something for a supposed reward, and these guys are literally cogs in the machine, making cogs in the machine. We don't know what these things are, but it looks like they should go on like a Star Destroyer or something big, heavy equipment. And at any moment, I felt so bad for that one older gentleman who had some trouble, getting that cylinder in the part. And that in and of itself is cruel, because you are competing as a team. And if you're not pulling your weight, then you're not going to be the favorite member of that team, right? So there's pressure there. Just every around every corner is just pressure and cruelty and fear. And boy, for the people that are there, as long as Andy Serkis's character seems like he's been there, what does that do to your psyche? Oof.
Right, but then they become so fixated on their ranking as a team. And the who's in first, how many points they have, right? That they sort of lose sight, and I think it's designed this way on purpose. They lose sight of why they're even there, or how, like whether or not they can get out, or if they should try to escape. Right? They're just so they're so focused on, okay, we gotta work as a team. We gotta do this. That's the one of the scariest things, I think. And I think Cassian sort of has this expression on his face as well, where he's just so confused. He's like, why are you all doing this? Why are you all hustling and being like, all right, like we can do it. We can do it. Like they're almost like they're playing a sport, right? They're like, we can do it. We can, let's go. They're working together. They're trying to cheer each other on. And that seems so distorted considering like what's really happening and the stakes of it. It gave me real Squid Game vibes. I don't know if either of you have seen that show on Netflix, the Korean.
That's a good comparison.
It's down to like the low vocoder voice that says like, now we're going to do this, right? Like it and then the aesthetics of they're all wearing the same uniform. And so that's why I said dystopian at the beginning, because I was like, it reminds me of that. It reminds me of Running Man, that Arnold Schwarzenegger movie.
1984 too, sort of.
Yeah. So
well, and it's also not difficult labor. This is you don't have to use your brain. Your hands are just going to go into autopilot mode. So you're distracted into a point of you don't even know how long you've been there anymore. And that's exactly what they want, because it's all cruel control. And they feed you enough to keep you strong, and they give you a place to you're warm and dry, right? You're not being threatened by other people, so it lulls you into this false sense of security. And then all the while you're spending your entire day just putting together a puzzle that you put together however many times a day, every day of your life. And then we're not worrying about prison riots, and we're not trying to worry about breaking out, because you're just constantly engaged in something so menial.
I did look, it is 30 shifts. So I guess it has been 30 days. So he figures it out pretty quickly. And the movie I was thinking about was called Papillon, Papil, Papillon, 1973. And I was wrong. It's not, it was Steve McQueen, not Paul Newman. Steve McQueen and Dustin Hoffman. Really disturbing film.
I'm writing that down. I'm going to go watch that.
It's really something. It's very heavy. There's something about 70s cinema anyway that's just pretty great. Mm-hmm. So a couple other key things about this. It's so bad there that someone would rather kill themselves painfully than go through it anymore. Something tells me that turnover is something of a regular. In fact, it's so bad that they have wagers on who's going to be the next one to go. It's almost like it's like a perverse entertainment. I won't go so far as to say they're rooting for it, but they're trying to find something to hold on to. Meanwhile, Cassian is still just in this constant state of, he can't believe that he's here. As a side note, I think this is sort of fun, that they do make a point of saying, hey, here's your razor, but Cassian, apparently his doesn't work. He still has that rugged face at 5 o'clock shadow thing going on, which I think is sort of fun. Anything else you want to say about just the prison rollout? Because I feel like we need to take a break and talk about the other characters in this episode, because I think there's a lot of threads to untangle.
Just that, to me, this feels like, because this as far as we know, this is the first in a 3-episode arc again, right? So I think to me it's going to be a prison break story, which is crazy, because right now it seems impossible for them to break out of this prison. Like, I don't know how they're going to do it. Like Colby was saying,
Clint Eastwood couldn't do it.
Right. This is no Shawshank Redemption. Like, this is like they're trapped there. I don't know how they're going to get out. So yeah, I think I'm looking forward to seeing what is the thing now that Cassian's been kind of lulled into a sense of like he's part of the routine now. What is the thing that's going to snap him out of it and get him to start conspiring with this new team that he has to break out of the prison?
I just want him out now, please.
The Empire might have other ideas in mind. I love the delicious irony too that the Empire is feverishly trying to find him. Everybody's trying to find him, and he's right there. He's not going anywhere.
They've already caught him. They just don't know.
Boy, he is going to be so lethal when he gets the upper hand. It's going to be really something to watch. Well, let's go ahead and take a break as we continue to marinate on Cassian's plight. When we return, Jen and Colby and I are going to look at the other characters in this episode, including Mon Mothma, Cyril, and Daedra. I'm Dan Zare, and this is Coffee with Kenobi.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
We are back. I'm here with Jen and Colby talking about the 8th episode of Andor. The episode again is titled Narkina 5, or is it Narkina? I can't remember.
I would have said Narkina.
I think it is.
But I haven't heard anything to.
Yeah, we'll just go with that. That is the Azerified response until we know otherwise. And the only reason I say that, by the way, is that is something my students, whenever I say something about homework, they're like, "Is that the Azerified official response?" And I say, "Yep." So we're just going to go with that. Shout out to my wacky students, love that. All right, let's talk about Mon Mothma. There's a great thing at the end with Luthen and Saw that was really a really welcome and very tense conversation. I've been really curious to see how those two are going to interact with each other. But let's talk about Mon Mothma and her. Time has passed. We know that now that she's got new funding for this growing rebellion. She's running into problems. There's a great conversation piece where she and several other upper echelon members of society, at least as far as financially appears anyway, they're commenting on their opinions of what's going on with the Empire and the Emperor himself. They've got some fairly curt words about him, which I don't feel like they would say if he was in the room. Maybe they would. Honestly, they seem so disillusioned and disenfranchised with how the world is actually working and how many people are suffering. But I think there's some really meaty stuff on that bone.
Well, there ain't no party like a Mon Mothma party, I'll tell you. And those parties I would not want to be anywhere near. And I was also surprised by the tone of that conversation with the group of people. And it made me think of episode 4 of the original Star Wars, where almost as a throwaway line, and I can't remember if it's Tarkin that comes in and says it, but it says that the Imperial Senate has been dissolved. We no longer, how are you going to keep control of the star systems through fear, right? These are those people. We're looking at those people having those conversations. And I just love that peek behind the curtain there of where they were, and we know where they're going. But yeah, it was really the thing with the Mon Mothma scenes for me, every time she's in her house and hosting these things, is just how fake everyone is. Mm-hmm. And how I just feel so terrible for her, because how does a person not crack when you have to put up these facades, knowing that you're surrounded by people that are putting up their facades? And she's probably the one that's most in danger. And she's not out meeting Saw Gerrera. She's not out recruiting people to the cause. She's not out involved in heists, trying to steal things, but she's probably the one that has the most danger around her all the time. And that dumb of a husband is the worst one, probably the most dangerous in my opinion. But I'm always just struck at, number one, the brilliant performances week after week of Genevieve O'Reilly.
Yes.
Again, this word tense, these tense scenes filled with dialogue that you feel like the whole galaxy is turning on when she's talking to Tay. I was really interested in the fact that he just disappeared, right? He was there 1 second, he's gone the next. What's up with that? But the act she has to put on, we're seeing a lot of the inner workings of the beginning of the rebellion, and Mon Mothma is like the foundation that they're all being built on, in my opinion.
Speaking of Genevieve O'Reilly, I thought it was magnificent how her face changed so quickly, right? Where she's like putting on a good show and kind of sweet talking the fellow senators or politicians or whoever's at the party. And then the second she walks away, it just like her face totally drops and she looks worried and concerned and like, what am I going to do? So I really loved her performance. I think has been so amazing from the start. But in this episode, you really get to see the sort of duality that she has to live in just on her face. But to me, actually, like this scene did more to give me insight into her marriage than I expected, because we learn a little bit more that they were in apparently the Chandrilan custom. They were married when they were 15, right? She became a senator at 16. And there's a lot of tension in terms of like how they have both kind of drifted apart over time, right? That she refers to him. Do you remember when he was a firebrand officer or something like that, right? And then how things have changed because now he seems very like indolent and
he's a fat cat
annoying.
now. Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah. And probably is either my money is on one of the members of her family turning on her or turning her in or something like that. I don't know. That's my biggest fear. But yeah, and that even something as subtle as, and that's why I love the show. It's like everything means something. The squibs or the squigs or what, I don't remember what they were called, the like little alcoholic worms that they were putting in the drinks. The idea that like he's kind of giving her a hard time for not wanting one. And she's like, I've lost my taste for them. And that's, to me, that's just said so much about like the nature of their relationship, how they both have changed over time. And it was great.
Symbolic, extremely symbolic. Yeah. They're sitting around at this party and this is the casual conversation. They say that Palpatine is frustrating. They also mention that he's too easily provoked and that he's overreactive. But then they talk about, he says what he means, but let's be honest about this here. He's going to keep us safe. And then Mon Mothma starts to become more assertive in her little social circle. And she goes, okay, what does that mean, public order? And she says and then one other senator says it's an awfully big box. The empire is supposed to protect us. We've got this P-O-R-D legislation. Mon Mothma says quite astutely, how much protection is enough? And a couple of people are like, hey, surveillance all the time. If you're not afraid of anything, then what do you have to fear? At no point is there any consideration to someone's rights, their dignity. It's all about paranoia and fostering mistrust. But ultimately, the conversation can't go anywhere because they laugh the whole thing off. She says to one of the senators, do you feel under threat? And the gentleman says, yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to have too much wine. I'm going to have too much Chandrilan hospitality. And she smiles. You can tell even for this, a little crack in that veneer starts to show. We know it because we know her and we know her arc. But everyone here is so, fat cats is the thing I keep thinking of. They're just so full of themselves and their luxury. That's like, ha ha ha. They wouldn't care about the peasants. If you watch any episodes of Tales of the Jedi, the things that Count Dooku sees in the first episode that he experiences, and I won't spoil it if people haven't seen it yet, but it's not unlike the disdain. Like if Count Dooku was in this room now before he turned to the dark side, that might have done it. That might have ignited that shit. I feel like this is kind of a key scene because while it's not necessarily the catalyst that propels her into further action, because we saw in the previous episode that she and Luthen kind of agree on the best way to kind of move forward. I feel like this was a big step. And surprisingly enough, and Jen, feel free to tell me I'm wrong, but I almost saw when they were reminiscing about their history together, I actually saw for a fraction of a second, I saw that they actually were in love at one point. And it gave me some sort of a hope that maybe he'll do right by her again at some point. I hope. I mean, he's done nothing to show that.
I hope that too.
Yeah, he's been nothing but a jerk that tries to look like Qui-Gon Jinn. And just a complete slovenly buffoon and a jerk. But I hope that there's a part of him that can possibly change. And maybe I'm just panhandling and I'm only going to find rocks and not gold. Probably.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not as, I would love that. I'm not as optimistic about that. To me, I read that as more, it's kind of, she's being wistful about the past. Like, oh, once, and because the key line there is like how things have changed. And she means that on so many levels. Like she means that politically, she means that in terms of their relationship. It has a lot of layers just to that one statement. And so I feel like, and I don't know what are they, do you think, actually, let me just ask, do you think they're setting up some kind of jealousy love triangle, or at least from her husband's perspective with Tay? And maybe, is that what he's going to think is going on? And it's really that they're working together, they're conspiring together politically. Is it both? What is your read on that right now?
I can see a replay of what happened with Bix and Tim and Cassian from the second and third episodes. I could see that as a potential angle, although I feel like that's too easy of a carrot, but maybe. I do want to be really clear on this. I don't think that Mon Mothma has any kind of torch for him. I think she is very focused on something else. I feel like he is a small man and a small person in his stature and in his sort of his moral compass. I feel like in his heart of hearts, part of the reason he acts the way that he is she is larger than life. And she is a tour de force in this galaxy and in the Senate, in her household. I feel like he's intimidated by her. And I feel like that's part of the reason why he's such a complete jerk, is that he knows in his heart of hearts that she is what is the joke that people say, you know, you outkicked your punt coverage when you ended up being married to this person. She is so out of his league, and in his fancy wares and his fancy drinks and his drinking squids, which who knew that would actually be a part of connecting those dots together. He knows in his heart of hearts that she's too good for him. She's too good for him. And he tries to keep her down. I hope he will stop acting like such a jerk, but it's not going to happen.
I think that if you ever find yourself at a sabacc table with Mon Mothma, that you should get up very quickly because she's going to take your money.
That's right.
I think she's playing her husband. And I think that is part of it. She has to play the role of, here, hold on, let me sweeten up your fizzy worm drink here real quick. But there's no fizz there, and there hasn't been for a long time. But she knows that she needs to basically acquiesce to him to keep him complacent, to keep him where he's at. And I absolutely think that he is jealous of Tay. He eagle eyes them the moment that he walks in the room. And to the point where last episode, I even questioned myself, is he going to rank her out? Is he the one that's going to cause the most danger, right? Because he was just so, every step they took, he was right there behind them, and similar to this episode as well. But I thought it was interesting that you brought up the PORD, and I never thought this is one of the things that's such a surprise and a pleasant surprise to this show. A piece of legislation is becoming central to the success of the rebellion. So we have this explosion right on Aldhani, and that has a cause and effect, and that's causing Luthen wanted this the whole time. It's causing the Empire to overreact, and it's taking the form of this public order resentencing directive. And we see that with Cassian, right? A 6-month sentence and now a 6-year sentence. All these new people in the prisons. So it's being brought up again in this party setting. And I think it's just so smart and interesting that we're seeing how these steps are working, right? There was a scene in today's episode, I believe it was when Luthen left Coruscant, and he just flew out into space. And it made me think again of episode 4, the Death Star. And that is, to all of us, that was the beginning, right? The beginning of the story. The PORD Andor, this series, is reframing that as the culmination of years of manipulation and chess playing. And I just think it's so interesting that a piece of legislation is the thing that's driving the fate of the Empire in the galaxy. So cool.
Yeah, and frightening, right? The power of a soulless government, and a villain with a plan, and how they can just, Luthen said earlier, we're so used to them choking our necks, we don't even realize we're being strangled. I'm paraphrasing there. I want to talk, I know our time is running short. This has actually been a wonderfully rich conversation, which is no shock considering not only the episode, but the two of you. Let's talk about, there's certainly things we can talk about with Daedra. I think that's interesting. I don't know how much we can really talk about there, but I think the really powerful thing is what happens between Luthen and Saw Gerrera. The reunion that I was hoping we would get to see sooner rather than later. We certainly do. I love the fact that they kind of sling little insults at one another. It's a very chesty thing. They're very kind of monoing each other up with this very subtle pretense, but they both feel like rattlesnakes that will just strike at any moment, especially Saw Gerrera. Like, we know Saw Gerrera is not someone to have on your bad side or in any way, shape, or form. I mean, there are two people you don't want behind you, Michael Myers and Saw Gerrera. And they're both very, very dangerous for different reasons. I like that one is like, when are you going to stop hiding, and when are you going to stop fighting with people that are on your side? And again, I'm paraphrasing if I had my notes, but let's talk about that, because I really, or you can talk about Dater too. I just think they're both fascinating.
Well, Luthen calls Saw an anarchist, which that was the most salacious thing to me, where I was like, oh, we've made it to anarchy already.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Right away.
Yeah. And that he kind of tries to extort him into not being an anarchist and joining up with them. And he says, no sale today. That whole conversation to me felt so deep. Like on the surface, they're talking about, oh, do you want these parts? But really, there's so much baked into their conversation. And I think I just love how Luthen's speech I don't have the whole dialogue written down, but he said something like, I'm a coward, which you're like, oh. And then he goes into, I'm so terrified that we're going to get past a point of no return. Right. And then it turns into this really rousing speech. That was probably my favorite part of that scene.
As soon as I saw two tubes, I was like, oh, Saw Gerrera. It's so unexpected, right? They just drop it, right? We don't know where Luthen is going when he tells his fancy spaceship to reroute to the longest route, right? And all of a sudden we're dropped into a scene with Saw Gerrera, and Stellan Skarsgård commands the screen every single time he's on any screen, and so does Forrest Whitaker. And then we get this treat of a scene with these two gigantic performers just having this nuanced conversation where neither one of them wants to show their hand. I love the fact that they're both giving credit and taking credit for the heist in Aldhani, and neither one of them really want to tip their hand. Like Luthen doesn't want to tip that. Yeah, that was me. But then Saw sort of he doesn't know if Luthen doesn't know that it was him, but he sort of wants him to think it was. Just such nuance. It reminded me of the conversations that he and Mon Mothma have in his little Easter egg filled store, and everything is in code. Everything means something else besides the words that are actually coming out of their mouth. But no one is around Saw and Luthen that they're going to be tipped off, that they have to worry about them being sold out. They're afraid of each other. And these are the rebels. This is what's somehow going to set the framework up of the Rebel Alliance. There is no alliance. There's no trust. There's diverging opinions of how to proceed. And it's so layered and nuanced. And the performances, the writing, that's why I said every episode is just going to default to an A. It's because this is what we're getting every single week. Where even if nothing blows up, or we don't see hyperspace, we'll need to see any of these things, because we get these juicy, delicious performances.
Well said. Well said. The depths that these creators are taking and giving us, showing us the power of the human condition and the human interactions and the lack of them, and what that does to your soul, and how it's causing such dissension. It's a wonder rebellion even started with as much mistrust there is, but it's understandable, because Saw Gerrera, I think it's pretty well established that he doesn't like the Empire very much, so he's not going to betray you. But I do feel like he would stab you in the back for his own purposes if he thought. He's very adamant and self-righteous. A sociopath who's self-righteous is pretty scary. And I think it's fair to say he probably is a sociopath. I don't know. Is he? He knows right from wrong, but he chooses. It's tricky. I'm clearly not a counselor. What do you think, Jen?
Well, I just kept thinking of the line he has where he says something like, my sense of purpose is clear. And it's so declarative that that's the potential for it to be like, oh, like he said, like that's the kind of thing a villain says. Right? Where he's like, I believe that it's not that I'm doing bad things. And it doesn't matter if I know that they're right or wrong. It's more that I think that this is, even if everyone else thinks it's wrong, I think it's right. This is the right thing to do. And I'm going to stick with that. Right. My sense of purpose is clear. So it sort of becomes clear that he's not going to budge, and he's not going to compromise that sense of purpose just to team up and gain support, or even gain supplies that he needs. Right. I think Luthen kind of implies that they're sort of, living on scraps, right? Mm-hmm. They're not like a flush operation necessarily. And I think he tries to leverage that. He's like, you really need these parts. Are you gonna starve for your principles, basically? And right. The answer is yes. But yeah, to me, this scene really clicked into place the idea that this show is the origin story of the Rebel Alliance, right? Because I think when we start A New Hope, the Rebel Alliance is already unified. It's already a thing. That's all there is at that point. All the factions, there's no mention of any factions or anything. And so what I'm really enjoying in this episode with this scene with the two of them is that it really puts into perspective, like, no, there is no Rebel Alliance. It's fragmented into these little subgroups. And so the idea is like, how are we going to get to the Rebel Alliance? And that's really exciting.
Right. Yeah. The path to hell is paved with good intentions. Right. Isn't that basically the line? Well, gosh, I mean, I feel like there's so much more we can discuss about this episode, and sitting here listening to the two of you talk is wonderful to me. I could just sit back with my cup of coffee and listen. And fortunately, both of you are regulars on podcasts, so we are fortunate for that. Jen, I was fortunate to talk with you on the Colby Cast, talking about the finale and the entire season 1 of She-Hulk. But it's been great having you on Coffee with Kenobi. You are certainly welcome to come back anytime. Please let everybody know about your amazing work and where they can find you online.
Yeah, well, first off, thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. And again, thank you so much for what you do for the Star Wars community and really fostering a sense of community through Coffee with Kenobi. I think as a listener and now a guest, that transition is really surreal because, I'm used to hearing your voice all the time, not actually talking back. But you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Sopchockchai, Sopchockchai. I'm usually posting stuff about things I'm watching, mostly Star Wars and Marvel, but also, things from my Star Wars collection. I have a healthy collection of Funko Pops that keeps growing. So I'll be posting about that usually. And you can find my writing at thelongtake.substack.com. And if you subscribe to that for free, you can get my reviews. So I haven't finished my review for this episode. So if you go and subscribe, you'll be the first to receive it when I finish it, hopefully in the next couple days.
Thank you so much. That is so kind of you. And definitely be sure to subscribe. You're not going to regret it. Jen's got a great take, as you can tell by listening if you heard her on a podcast. So thank you so much, Jen. Colby, what about you, buddy?
Well, yeah, you can hear me talk to my two 20-something-year-old sons, Caleb and Luke, where I basically read Jen's The Long Take and then just start talking about stuff that she writes. I'm only partly joking. But I also, again, because something that Jen just said, because of you, sir, you have built this great community where I've met a lot of people, and I invite them on to talk about a bunch of fun things on the Colby Cast, which is Star Wars and Marvel, House of the Dragon, all kinds of stuff, and movies that are going to come out. And we just try to have some fun, and good people like yourselves join me. And I really appreciate all that. So we have some fun about whatever it is that might be on the table to talk about. You can find the Colby Cast on Twitter and Instagram at the Colby Cast. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram, my personal account at crosschecked3, the number 3. And thanks again for having me on, Dan.
Oh, my pleasure.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.